Thank you very much. Welcome back, America. We're in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where elections are often decided for this great country. We're at the Bootcamp for Boomers, AMAC's great training sessions. They're going across this country, training everyday Americans how to get engaged in their system, how to make a difference in the November election. We just finished a very powerful panel on immigration, and one of the questions that came up is why are conservatives not doing a better job telling the stories and owning the narrative in America? Well, one of the things that's important, a lot of times conservatives come to debates with pie charts and PowerPoints, and Democrats bring real human stories. Real human stories are sometimes the most powerful way to tell Americans the consequences of what Washington and federal policies are doing. Our next guest has one of the most powerful stories I've ever heard. It puts parents' rights center in our country. January Littlejohn is a wife and a stay-at-home mom to 3 children. She has a master's degree in counseling and is a licensed mental health counselor. But in 2020, her 13-year-old daughter, get a load of this, was socially transitioned at her middle school without January's knowledge, without mom's knowledge or consent. In 2021, January and her husband filed a federal lawsuit, I remember covering this, against the school district for parental rights violations, and she has since become a passionate defender of parental rights, speaking out about the dangers of radical gender ideology and helping parents whose children have fallen victim to it. Please help me welcome January Littlejohn. January, great to have you here. Welcome.
Good morning. As he stated, my name is January Littlejohn, and I am from Tallahassee, Florida, and I'm here to tell my story. So in the spring of 2020, our 13-year-old daughter came to us and told us that she no longer felt like a girl. This was shortly after 3 of her friends at her middle school also had suddenly proclaimed transgender identities. Well, what's important to know today about this ideology is the word transgender no longer has a coherent meaning. 25 years ago, when I was trained in my master's program, it was very rare, and it was predominantly males that started in early childhood who had experienced distress over their sex. Often it was related to trauma. And we were trained very little in this area because it was so rare. That is no longer what is happening today. Today, children, including in your state, are being taught the lie that they have a so-called gender identity, that it is completely separate from their sex, and that they choose to be a boy, girl, neither are both. This is just one of the many tools that are used in GSA Clubs, sex ed curriculum, and SEL programs throughout our country to brainwash children into this line of thinking. So why my daughter? This ideology preys on the vulnerable. My daughter has ADHD, and so she's emotionally behind her peers. And at the time of middle school, which is a time of identity crisis for lots of kids, she was experiencing a lot of discomfort over the changes in her body. She had trouble and difficulty making and maintaining friendships. And she really was very socially awkward and quirky. And so what's important to understand is many of these children have no previous confusion as a history. They are coming into this ideology at a very vulnerable and impressionable time. And instead of being told it's normal to feel uncomfortable at your body at puberty, you're going to get through it. We all felt this way. They are being told if you feel discomfort in your body, it's probably because you're trans. So in May of 2020, after she told my husband and I that she was experiencing distress, we sought help from a licensed counselor. We were completely blindsided by this issue. I was a volunteer at the middle school, and so I really trusted the teachers. I saw them as a partner as we were bringing our children up. So as school was starting, I reached out to a teacher and let her know that our daughter was struggling with this confusion, that I thought it was directly related to her friend group, that my husband and I were not affirming this identity at home, and that basically we were dealing with this as a family. Well, that teacher turned out to be the LGBTQ advocate on campus. I had no idea that there was such a thing on every campus in Leon County, including elementary schools. So a couple of weeks went by, and my daughter got into the car, and she said, "Mom, I had a meeting today, and they asked me which restroom I wanted to use." I was shocked. I immediately contacted the guidance counselor, and you have to remember, this was the height of 2020, so parents were not allowed on campus. My only form of communication was email. And I was immediately called back by the guidance counselor and the assistant principal and was told that they could not give me any information about the meeting they had with my child, that she is now protected by a non-discrimination law. My only recourse was to talk to the assistant superintendent, which I did immediately via email, and this email correspondence went back and forth about 7 weeks, and we were finally given an in-person meeting with the principal of the middle school, and this is the first time we were shown the transgender support plan that they completed with our 13-year-old daughter without our knowledge or consent. And by the way, these same plans are being used in your state. I've done research that I'll go into in just a few minutes about what's happening in your schools here in Pennsylvania. So as you can see, the only question that they ask the child is, are your parents supportive? And if the answer is no, that child has the ultimate authority as to whether or not their parents will be notified or invited to the meeting where there are questions that are absolutely going to impact your child's safety. And I'm just going to go through this quickly, but some of those questions are, which locker room and restroom do you prefer to use? They allow the child to choose based on their quote-unquote gender identity. And which sex do you prefer to room with on overnight field trips? The last question that they ask the child is, how should we refer to you when speaking to your parents? And this is effectively to deceive parents that these social transitions have even taken place. So after we had this meeting, I was in shock that they could not give my child Tylenol or even put her picture in the yearbook without my signature, but they somehow completed this gender support plan without me knowing. And just so you're aware, I wasn't just some parent off the street. I was volunteer of the year at this middle school. They knew who I was. When I did a deep dive, I learned that what happened to our family was not an isolated case. This was being done all over our country, and oftentimes we have no way of knowing how many of these support plans have been done behind the backs of parents, because school counselors and teachers are being trained to not put these support plans into the child's cumulative file. So when a parent asks for the cumulative file, these plans are not included. So when I looked into, well, where does this lead? What happens after social transition? What pathway is my daughter now on? What you understand when you pull back the curtain from quote-unquote gender-affirming care is that children as young as 8 and 9 years old are given puberty blockers. This is the same drug used to chemically castrate sex offenders. And this is to stop puberty. So not only does it stop the secondary sex characteristics, it stops brain development, it stops bone development, and they were doing these drugs with no long-term studies of their effects. They're being used off-label. They are also giving children in their teens cross-sex hormones. So once they stop the puberty, you have to go on to cross-sex hormones. Otherwise, the child is never going to develop any kind of maturation at all. And then lastly, I was horrified to learn that children as young as 12 years old are getting double mastectomies. And we now have several lawsuits, thankfully, 2 of which in California, Layla Jane and Chloe Cole, who both underwent double mastectomies as minors. What you also have to realize is these drugs that these children do not have the maturity to consent to, they are sterilizing the children, and they are destroying the sexual functioning of these kids, oftentimes before they're even mature enough to understand what sex is. And that is horrifying, because what I saw with my daughter, the red flags that I continue to see within this friend group, was many of them at age 11 and 12 were proclaiming these sexual orientation identities like pansexuality, bisexuality, and none of them had ever had a boyfriend or girlfriend or even held someone's hand. So what a couple of the speakers prior to me talked about is the Title IX changes that are coming. And, Title IX was passed in 1972 that banned sex discrimination for federally funded K-12 and college education and sports. The Biden administration, what he is doing is, without congressional approval, he is replacing the word sex to mean this made-up word gender identity. And so what this means is it will allow males into basically self-select into female spaces and restrooms, sports, and it will make it discrimination for a school and university to not affirm a student's self-professed gender identity. It will also make it sexual harassment for a fellow student not to affirm that student in their self-professed gender identity. And lastly, it'll take away due process for males being accused of sexual assault. If you want to know more about these changes that are coming that will be effective August 1st, Megyn Kelly has been covering this extensively since Friday, and it's critically important coming into an election that people fully understand what these changes mean. This is far worse than limits on abortion. And so it's really important for women in particular to understand that these Title IX changes are catastrophic for all of our children. The last thing that it will do is destroy parental rights in this area. So all of the wonderful laws that have been passed in Florida by Governor DeSantis and our legislators will be undone. So here in Philadelphia, you have a policy 252. And key elements of this policy are exactly what our policy was in Leon County in 2020. School personnel should not disclose information that may reveal a student's gender identity to others without the student's authorization. So they are putting the burden of this critical decision that has lifelong consequences on a child, and they are excluding parents from this decision. And one of the things that I have noticed about this ideology time and again is they always do it under the guise of safety. They brought these policies into the schools under the guise of anti-bullying policies and making sure the kids are safe. But if they truly cared about safety, parents would be included in these gender transition plans every single time. The other issue that has been weaponized is abuse. They are presuming all parents to be abusive to their children and using that as justification to cut parents out. And lastly, they have weaponized suicide. Oftentimes I get the question, how could parents possibly consent to the sterilization of their own child? Well, what's happening is parents are being lied to just as the kids are. And they are being told, if you don't medically transition your child will likely commit suicide. There is no evidence of this. By the grace of God, my daughter is completely free of any confusion. She is now 17, and we are still in the middle of the court case. These cases take, thank you. These cases take years. So we are just now at the process of appealing the judge's dismissal of our case, and the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals will now determine whether our case moves forward and can start to be heard in trial, or if the case is completely dead. But I tell you that because it's hard enough to get parents to stand up when it comes to this issue. Many falsely believe that if it doesn't impact them directly, that it's not going to harm their family, and that is just not true. And we are seeing the harms just last week at one of your middle schools where a child was severely beaten by a trans-identified child who happened to be male with a Stanley Cup. This ideology turns children against their bodies. It creates a level of chaos that we have never seen. And it literally is a war on our families and on our parent-child relationship. Because what the school actually did is they celebrated my daughter's self-hatred. Most of these girls who are falling prey to gender ideology have a deep self-loathing. And what schools are doing when they affirm these children in a false identity is they are affirming that self-hate. They are affirming in that child's mind that something is in fact wrong with them. And the only way to fix their distress is to go along this path of medical transition. This is the biggest medical scandal against children we have ever seen. And other European countries have completely reversed course. The NHS in the UK is now prohibiting puberty blockers to treat gender dysphoria. Scotland has done something similar. Multiple countries have done systematic reviews, including the CASS review, C-A-S-S. The evidence is overwhelming that these medical interventions harm children. But what's happened in the United States, the reason why we are an outlier is because this issue has been politicized. But I can promise you for these families who have children that have fallen prey to this ideology, it is not political for them. And the vast majority of families that I work with are families on the left, and they are devastated. It happens very quickly, and it escalates very quickly for these kids. And what I do full-time now is I help parents to walk their children through this confusion. This is a radical ideology, and it oftentimes takes radical steps to get your child free of it. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And in some states like California, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado, they are now stating it is abuse to not affirm your child in a transgender ideology. And that is irrelevant or irrespective to co-occurring issues, because the truth is the vast majority of these girls falling prey, they have histories of sexual trauma. Up to 40% of them are on the autism spectrum, and many have serious comorbidities and co-occurring mental health issues such as eating disorders, self-harm, depression, and anxiety. These children are not well, and what they need is psychotherapy, not medical interventions. So some of the ways that this ideology has infiltrated our schools, this is from a school here in Pennsylvania, and they had Trans Visibility Day, where they had boards dedicated to transgender. You know, they're painting this as a human rights issue, and I agree it's a human rights issue, because it is a human right for a child to be able to grow into adulthood with their body whole and intact. They deserve to grow up with their brains fully mature before given the ability to make irreversible, lifelong consequences to their own bodies. GSA Clubs, they used to be Gay Straight Alliance, and they have morphed into Gender Sexuality Alliance. Other issues are SEL, which is social emotional learning. They will tie this ideology into that. In places like New Jersey, they are required to embed gender identity ideology into K through 12 curriculum. So you have very impressionable children being falsely taught that they could be born in the wrong body. So essentially, they are creating confusion in children where otherwise confusion would not have existed. This is not happening organically. The UK has seen about a 4,000% increase in girls claiming transgender identities. So what can you do? It's really important for you to simply tell the truth. Speak up. Silence is complicity. It's really important for you to be inoculating your children and grandchildren. And what that looks like is teaching them the truth from a young age, whether it's from a place of faith or not. We are born male and female, and regardless of what you do to your physical body, that can never change. Children need to be told that from very young ages at an age-appropriate level, because it's not a matter of if they will be exposed to this ideology, it's when. This has permeated every aspect of our culture, from movies to children's programming. So even if you homeschool or have them in a Christian private school, they are not safe. I am working with families that are homeschooling their children where their children were exposed online. So there are a lot of things that you can do, but for the sake of time, have conversations with neighbors, your pastor. Churches need to get off the sidelines on this issue, because if the church is unwilling to stand in the gap and protect our children from these lies, what hope do we have? And the last thing I will tell you is kindness and compassion has been hijacked when it comes to this issue. Our kids are being told, well, it's kind to affirm someone in their identity. Doesn't that feel good when your identity is affirmed? It is not kind to lie to a child. It is not kind to tell a child they can be born wrong. And we must be forceful out of a place of love and compassion in getting people to see the truth of this. Many people do not believe that this is happening. But we have things like the CAST review, we have the Reuters report that show beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is absolutely happening to our children. I have helped create a transgender response guide specifically for churches and parents. Please take a photo of this. It has a QR code. You can order the guide online. It is almost 100 pages long, and it's a comprehensive guide designed to help parents and pastors understand this issue, talk about it from the pulpit, and protect children from this ideology. I'm going to blow through these last two so we can get to questions. These are resources for education. This is not an exhaustive list, but it'll give you a place to start so that you can begin having these conversations. And then here are legal resources and resources for parents who actually have children who have fallen prey to this ideology. I really appreciate you all having me today, and now I'm going to open the floor for questions.
Mrs. Littlejohn, thank you so much for your presentation. A big fat ditto to everything you said. I'm a retired family physician from Sellersville, PA, and I frequently make public comments at our school board meetings where an issue with bathrooms is raging. And a couple things I'd like to add to your talk. I'm glad you mentioned the CAST report. Everyone in this room should read the CAST report because it totally blows out of water the harmful transgender treatment that's going on. Another event was the report, the WPATH files by Michael Schellenberger, an acclaimed journalist who WPATH is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And this is what all these malpracticing doctors are following worldwide when they perform these mutilating surgeries and other forms of treatment on these kids. WPATH's guidelines have also been defunct. It's now a discredited organization. And I just wanted to tell you, too, that during my public comments at our school board, I used a link to one of your videos as information for our school board to view. So, and are you a member of the Do No Harm group?
I am.
Yeah, I am as well. So a great organization out there is called Do No Harm Medicine.org. Dr. Stanley Goldfarb from Penn is the founder. Another member is Dr. Miriam Grossman, whose book you guys should read. It's called
Lost in Transnation.
Lost in Transnation. It's an excellent book for parents, students, teachers, everybody. It'll inform you about all the insanity that's going on. And I could go on for hours about this.
Thank you so much for your comment. And, you know, I really appreciate doctors having the courage to stand up. It's so important because what he's saying is absolutely 100% true. The AMA, the AAP, you know, American Academy of Pediatrics, you have the Endocrine Society, you have all of these very powerful professional organizations following these fraudulent guidelines put out by WPATH that is not a medical professional organization at all. And so that's why I call this a medical scandal, because this was all built on quicksand. There was never any evidence to back up performing these radical interventions on children especially. But if you look into detransitioners, there's a lot of information out there in the past 4 years. There are faith-based documentaries. There are regular documentaries. You know, we've made a lot of progress, but we need the truth to get out because just as other speakers have said, the mainstream media is complicit in lying about this. They are captured just like the medical professional associations are. And, you know, I could give a whole talk on parental rights in our medical field and how that's going astray, but parents need to refine their authority, and they need to understand that they can opt out of these types of things that are occurring in the doctor's office. Do not leave your child alone with a doctor. Do not allow them to give them a garbage depression screening at every single visit. That is not in the best interest of our children. Yes.
Could you please track back the genesis of this from the schools, the education in the classroom, to the school board? Who's behind all of that? Follow that back for me.
Sure. So it's been in the works for actually a very long time, way prior to 2020. I can speak to Florida, the Human Rights Campaign, organizations like GLSEN, G-L-S-E-N, and GLAD, G-L-A-D-D, have all worked in unison to get these types of policies into the schools. So if you go to Human Rights Campaign, they have a whole Safe Schools initiative, and they also have the same type of initiative for healthcare hospitals. So what they do is they go in like there's some kind of authoritative figure on this topic, and they say, how best are you serving and protecting your LGBTQ patients or students? And they do checklists. In Florida, there was an organization called Equality Florida that had a whole department of people willing to go in and train all of the administration, the teachers, everybody in the school on these. They didn't call them policies, they called them guidelines, because if it's a policy, it has to go through school board approval. So what you have to understand is this is an intentional effort to go into the schools, put these policies in place, and keep them secret from parents. But I am out of time. Thank you so much. If you want more information, there is a resource page that I put together on donoharmmedicine.com. Thank you. .org, sorry. Thank you.
All right, if you're sitting here right now and you think, can I make a difference? Can one person make a difference? January Littlejohn just showed you how you make a difference. Step into the void. That's what AMAC's helping you do today. All right, we're going to take another commercial break. When we come back, we got a great panel, election integrity. I know it's on a lot of people's minds. We'll have that. Rebecca Weber will take us through that great conversation right after these messages.